Okay, welcome back. Right now, if we take a look, we have ability for users to sign up, but one issue that we're having right now is that we're storing their password in a plain text. And if we take a look here, so I'll open my Postman and I'll open my RoboMongo. So I just removed everything from my database like a second ago. And right now, if I were to just submit this as a new user, this will work, but of course we'll see this document over here with the password, which is just plain old text of password that I entered over here. And that's a pretty big no-no when it comes to the building APIs and web sites in general, because in the scenario in which someone could get access to our database, then they could leak all of the users' passwords, and that's really a huge issue that you don't want to get yourself involved with. So what we want to do now is to do some password hashing and password salting using the Bcrypt module for Node, and let's do that. So first of all, we need to actually install it. So I'll open this, let me just quickly close the server, then I'll type yarn add bcrypt.js. There is also alternative that is just called Bcrypt, but it uses some C and C++ dependencies, so you need to actually install something on the environment that you want your code to run from. So for these purposes, it's much easier for me to actually install this one, but that other one is a bit faster. So in the production environment, you can simply like edit these dependencies, so just get rid of this one and import the other one. And if you were to simply change like the required statements, it should work the same. So I'll install this one. Okay, and now what we need to do is we need to create some code that will actually do the hashing and salting of our password. So one good place for doing those kind of things is the model file. So I can go to this user.js model file inside of this models directory, and here we can write some functionality that will deal with that. So first of all, we need to get a reference to that Bcrypt library that we just installed. So I'll type const bcrypt equals require and then bcrypt.js like this. And then what we want to do is we're going to use this neat functionality that Mongoose provide for us, and those are the functions that will run before something happens. So in this scenario, we want to write some function that will happen before we actually call .save on our user. So if you take a look over here in this controller file, you see in the sign up function, once we actually create a new user, we call this new user.save. So what we want to do is we want to write some piece of code that will get triggered by this, and that will actually run before this .save functionality takes place. So to do that, we can come here, we can reference our user schema by its name, so user schema, and then we can call this function called pre, and then we need to specify like before what action takes place. So we want to say save over here. And then we need to provide a function over here that will actually get run when that happens. So we're going to type async function, and then we have one parameter that is called next, and then we're just going to put it inside of that as a callback function. Now you may notice that I didn't use fat arrow function, so I didn't do something like this. And there is a good reason for that. In this function, we'll need to reference this password field by typing this.password, literally like this.password will yield us back the password that this user currently contains. And if we were to use the fat arrow function, this wouldn't work because the way in which fat arrow function modifies this variable over here. So that's just like one tip to be aware of. And then we need our try catch block. So let's I'll write something like this. And if there were any errors, let's simply call next with such errors. And now in this try block, we need to do our salting and hashing. So first we need to generate a salt that we're going to use for the hash of our password. So let's put in a comment, maybe saying generate a salt, something like that. And how can we do that? Well, Bcrypt that we just imported contains a function that is called generate salt, like this. And we also have a sync version, but we want to use async version, of course, so we're going to go with this one. And as a parameter, we need to provide a number of rounds to use, and we're going to simply use 10 for this. Now this function takes a couple of milliseconds. It is an async function after all, so we're going to use that beautiful await keyword that async await gives us, and then we're going to store this salt into our custom variable that we can then later on refer to. So I'm going to simply make a new variable, let's call it salt, and let's assign it to this. Now what we need to do is we need to actually hash a password using this salt over here that we just generated. So we can do it really in a similar manner. So Bcrypt library again has a function that is called simply hash, and again, as you can see, we have this hash synchronous version and this async version, but of course we're going to go with this one. And what this function actually expects for us is it basically expects a plain password over here, so let's say user password over here, and then it also expects a salt as a second argument, and we're going to provide it like this. Okay, now of course we don't want to be using this for everyone's passwords, so we need to refer back to whatever user actually inputted as their passwords. So as you can see here, we create a new user and we pass this email and password that we receive from the client. For example, this, let's say code worker over here, like this is the password that user typed, and we pretty much want to get a handle to this value over here, code worker, here in this part over here. So we can do that by referencing this particular user object that we are doing all of this functionality on, and then we can simply access the password field like this. Now of course this is yet another async function, and that also takes a couple of milliseconds or something like that. So we need to go and use the await keyword once again, and preferably store this hashed version into some variable over here. So let's say hashed password, or actually password hash, like that. Now before I do anything else, this is going to be really interesting. So what I'll do is I'll use a couple of console log statements inside of here, and let's say salt, and let's simply provide it. And then let's also output like the normal password and simply reference this.password. And then let's also output to the terminal hashed password, and we're going to get that by using this variable password hash. So now let's actually, this will be interesting, let's remove this document from here. Okay, and now let's do the same thing again, but let's now take a look at what happens in this console. And I also need to start it. Yarn start dev. Okay, and now let's see what happens. So I'm simply going to execute this request one more time. And as you can see, here is what's going on. First of all, we generated this salt over here. Then we get access to our password that we use our postman to actually send to the server. And then this is our hashed password. Now one interesting thing over here is if you take a look at this salt over here and you take a look at our hashed password version, you see how this looks awfully similar to this. And in fact, this is the salt part over here. So what's going on is this hashed password contains not only the hashed password per se, which is like this, but it also contains the actual salt that is used to hash this password, and the reason for that is later on when we want to actually compare when the user wants to log in and we want to compare whether this code worker is actually this hashed password, we can use this sol to once again hash this newly entered password on the fly and compare whether the hash is the same. So that's the reason behind storing the salt like again in this hashed password. Okay, so hopefully that clears a couple of things for you. And what we want to do next is we want to get rid of all these comments, and we simply want to now modify the actual password that is stored in user document with this hashed version of it. So we can type this.password and simply assign this password hash. Now I can also put a couple of comments over here, generate password hash, and I'll also make a note that it is actually salt plus hash. And now we pretty much like reassign a hashed version over original plain text password, something like that. And then what we want to do is simply call next, because otherwise the entire request will actually hang on over here. But with this next, we'll simply let it proceed whatever next operation should happen. And this is pretty much done. And now what is really cool is if we let me check if we have, okay, we don't have anything. The server is restarted, I hope it is. Now let us actually do this once again. Okay, everything seems to be good. And if I open RoboMongo and I refresh this users collection and I open this newly created document, we see now that the password is no longer in plain text format, but instead we see this hashed version of it, which is really good, and that was our first tasks for this video. So now we are able to create new users using the Bcrypt to actually hash and salt their passwords, and that's great. Now we can move on and work on the logging in already existing users. Okay, so now let's get back to our password.js file over here, and we can take a look here and see that we have this JSON web strategy pretty much done. And this local strategy, we started doing that in the previous video, but we didn't finish it. So what we need to do is we need to check if the password that user just entered is actually a correct one. So we're going to handle that similarly in the model file. So if I open this user.js file, what we can also do is we can assign methods to this user schema, and we're going to create a new method that will pretty much just check whether the newly entered password matches the one that is stored in the database, which is a hashed version, by the way. So what we can do is underneath this one, we can again reference the user schema by its name, then we can type .methods, and then we can create our new method. So our new method, we can call it something like is valid password or something similar. And then again we're going to use async function, but again we couldn't use the fat arrow function because we're going to use this this variable inside. So we are going to type async function, and it is going to take one parameter, and that is going to be the password that user who is trying to log in currently entered. So let's say something like new password. So first of all, we need that try catch block. So let me type that really quickly, try catch error, and then if the error happens, we're going to throw new error, and we're going to simply wrap whatever error we got in that catch statement. We can't use next here like we could use over here because we don't have access to next. So that's why we need to throw a new error and actually create it on the fly. And in the try block, what we want to do is, again, the Bcrypt library contains a function that is called compare, and again we have two versions of it. We're going to use the async one, and this compare actually takes like two passwords. The first password is the one that is actually in plain text. So this over here, we should say put code worker in our scenario, since that's our password. But the other parameter is the hashed version of the password that we are trying to compare this one to. So if I want to give you a really clear example, I could just copy this, and this is pretty much what this Bcrypt compare wants to get. So it wants to get a plain password, it wants to get a hashed version of the original password, and simply make a comparison whether those two are the same. So now how can we access this plain version of password? We can access via this parameter over here. So I'm just going to replace that with this. And the hashed version, well, we can reference it using this.password, because by the time this has already run, we know that this.password is equal to the password hash. So I can simply use this.password and replace this over here, like that. Now, of course, this is async function, so it could take a couple of milliseconds. So I'm going to use a wait keyword over here, and this will actually return to us a boolean, so either true or false. So we can simply return it like this. We don't need to store it in some variable and then return it. We of course could, but we can do it in one line like this. Okay, so now I can save this file. I can come back to this passport.js file, and we can move on and fill all of these comments. So we need to check if the password is correct. Well, right now we can use our user object user, and then we can call is valid password on it, and then we need to provide a newly entered password, and newly entered password is in this variable over here, so we can simply pass that variable password. And then again, this is async function, so we need to await it, and then we can store it in a variable. Let's name it is match or something like that, something similar. Now we can simply check whether the is match is actually true, meaning the user entered the correct password. But if we want to stay consistent with our comments from before, we can actually check the opposite. So I'm going to come here, and if not candidate, I'm going to say, so if it isn't a correct one, do something. And what we want to do is we want to return done, but this time we're going to say, well, no errors really, but yeah, you won't get the user object because the password isn't the correct one. And otherwise, if everything was correct indeed, we can simply call done and say, well, no errors, and here is this user that you asked for. Now, before we move from this file, you might notice that we're missing a try-catch block inside of here. So let's quickly fix that. So I'm going to create this try and then catch block as well, and then I'll move all of this code into the try block. Okay, like this, and then in the catch, what you want to do is simply call done, pass in the error, and say false for the user object, like this. Okay, so now this should work perfectly. So let's give it a quick test run. Let me just simply make sure that in the controllers, what we are doing in the sign up scenario, okay, secret, okay, so this sign in, where we need to generate a token over here, and if we take a look at the routes, this sign in, we also need to call the passport over here. So before we actually let our client get access to our server using the request, we first of all need to do something similar as we've done over here. So we need to reference the passport, and then we want to authenticate, but this time we want to use a local strategy, and this again we want to specify that the session should be false because we're building API and it is stateless. So this should be good, but we also could validate a body over here. So let me simply check whether we have something similar over here. Okay, we have, and this should be good because we're going to need pretty much the same set of information for both the sign up and the sign in. So in this route we can also call validate body over here, and again reference that authentication schema like this. Now if user is actually able to execute this code over here, it means that the login was pretty much successful. So let us simply console.log and say something along the lines of successful login, something like this. Okay, now let's see what happens. So currently we have this user already in our database, and if you remember, this is the user that we're talking about. So I'm going to copy this endpoint, I'm going to paste it. It's going to be pretty much the same, it's just going to be sign in instead of a sign up. Let me simply just send it so I'm sure that's the one, and indeed it is. So now if I open this and I send JSON as a body of such request, and I specify the email and I specify our password, let's see what happens if I send this request to our server. And as you can see, we don't get anything here because we're not responding to our client from this function over here, but from the terminal we can clearly see that the login was indeed successful. Now let us cancel this request, but let me put a wrong password. Let's say codeworker 5 or something. And as you can see, we get this unauthorized message and we don't get a successful login. Instead, this route will respond to this client with the 401 unauthorized status code. So this is working wonderfully. So what we need to do now is, in this case, we want to also generate a token so that the client can proceed by accessing some of the protected resources using the token. So it's going to be really similar to what we done previously. So what we need to do is we need to sign a new token. So again, we can say token equals sign token. But now how do we access to this new user? Here it was easy because we actually gathered all the pieces from the request.body and then we actually created a new user. So that's how we were able to use it. But over here, because we actually called this passport.authenticate, passport is going to give us access to pretty much this user if we access the user property of the request object. So just to show you, I can console.log this and say request.user like this, and let me simply comment out this line, and let me really quickly just do this again so you can see. So if I try to log in with the correct password, you see that we have access to our user by accessing this request.user object, and that is exactly how we are going to access that user and then pass that user to this sign token function so that we are able to get a JWT token back. So I'm going to simply remove all of this, bring this back online and then I'm going to pass in request.user like this. Okay, so now we have access to our token, and then we can simply respond with the status of 200, and in the JSON we can simply forward that token to our client like this, and then I can get rid of this line altogether. So now if I save this file and I try all of it once again, so let's see what happens. So I'm using the correct email and password combination, I click send, I'm trying to log in, it works and I'm getting this token. I try to mess something up on purpose and I try to send it, I get unauthorized. Okay, so now let's see if we can use this token and actually access the protected resources from the secret part. So I'm going to copy this token. Okay, and I'm going to create a header and I'm going to call this authorization and then bearer like this. And then I'll simply copy this endpoint. We need a get one and we need secret. I think this is the one, but let me see. Okay, and it didn't work. Oh, okay, I think I know what the problem is. I did put this bearer, which I did use in some of my other projects, so I think that's it. So if I remove that piece over here and I try this once again, yes, this works. Yeah, sorry about that. So we can now clearly use the token that we get by logging in and then proceed on to access the secret resources. So now I'm just going to go through everything like once again just to make sure that everything works. So I'm going to actually get rid of our user over here. Okay, I'm going to get rid of all of these shells, and then what I want to do is I want to first of all create a new user. Okay, let's see if that works. That works. Then let me try to use this token and actually access these secret resources. Okay, let's see. Okay, it works. Now let me actually try to log in as that user. So let's say that we lost track of this token, or that it expired, and now we want to log in again. So I'm going to first of all do something really wrongly. Let's say 5. Okay, now if I do it correctly, okay, I get this token. Now if I use this token and try to access the secret resources once again, it works again. Okay, so now we have this entire flow working. One small thing that we can do, maybe to make this code a bit prettier, we can we can use this passport.authenticate local piece over here, and we can maybe assign that to a new variable. Let's call it require, or actually let's say passport sign in, because that is when user wants to sign in. So we can simply replace it with this, and we can take this line over here, maybe create a new variable, call it passport JWT, and assign it to that, and I'll put a missing semicolon over here, and then we can simply use it over here. So I'm not sure if that helps at all, but that is one thing that we can do. So now we have the entire user login and registering or sign in and sign up flow done. Okay, so this is the end of the phase 1. So we've done everything that we want to do in the phase 1. We have this flow entirely working as of now. In the next phase, the phase 2 of this series, we'll actually go on and add Google and Facebook authentication. It's going to be a bit tricky, simply because the way we need to communicate back and forth with Google and Facebook and exchange all sort of access tokens, refresh tokens, things like that. But I'll try my best to explain it, and it should make sense in the end. It is also going to be a bit tricky because we're also like merging the local authentication and that third-party authentication, but that's really something you pretty much want to have on your web application, because you really don't want to miss on those third-party authentication that nowadays are more and more popular. But of course you would still want to allow users to create accounts using this local strategy by them typing their email and passwords manually. I hope that you enjoyed this and that you learned something. If you need help, please leave a comment down below. I'm reading all the comments and I'll help you as long as I personally can. If you have any feedback, any suggestions, any comments, again, please leave them down in the comments. If you like this video in this phase and this series, please leave a like. If you disliked it, please dislike it and then give me a reason if possible, so that I can improve. Last but not least, if you really enjoyed this series and you're looking forward to the next episodes, please be sure to subscribe, and that way you'll be notified as soon as I upload any new videos. So guys, thanks for watching once again. I'll see you in the phase 2 of this series. Take care and goodbye.